Please, could I have your food? The voice was quiet, careful, and far too polite for someone asking for leftovers. But it made Edward Carter stop mid-motion, his knife hovering above a tender cut of filet mignon. The polished blade caught the glow of the candlelight, flickering like hesitation itself. He looked up slowly. She stood just beside the table, soaked from the light October drizzle outside. No more than 20, maybe younger. Her skin pale beneath the street lamp tan of the restaurant's golden hue, her blonde hair twisted into a weary bun. In her arms a baby, swaddled tightly in a flannel blanket, asleep or simply too tired to cry. Edward didn't answer right away. This wasn't the kind of place where strangers interrupted your dinner. Langford's Prime was a fortress of hushed conversations and aged Bordeaux, tucked away behind velvet drapes and brass chandeliers. His table 9 was the one he'd reserved every year. Same day, same time, for the last 6 years. It had always been a table for two, but across from him sat the same thing that always sat there now. Silence, the empty chair, the absence of his wife, his son, the cruel echoes of a crash on Lakeshore Drive that had taken them both. His gaze dropped to the plate. He hadn't touched it, just like every year. The food was still warm, but in that moment, the meal stopped being symbolic. It became real again, and for the first time, he noticed how good it smelled. Rosemary, pepper, the buttery finish of garlic potatoes. Her eyes weren't on him. They were on the plate. Not greedy, not disparity, just tired. A waiter started toward them, his brow furrowed, but Edward gave a slight shake of the head, a signal, a command. Don't interfere. He returned his gaze to the girl. Her coat was too thin for the wind outside. The baby stirred slightly, its cheeks round and pink. There was no shame in the way she asked. No dramatics. No outstretched hand. Just for him, she added softly, glancing down at her child. Edward's chest tightened. Without a word, he slid the plate across the white linen cloth, until it sat near the edge of the table closest to her. She didn't reach for it. Not right away. She looked at him first. Really looked like she was trying to see the strings behind the gesture, the cost hidden in generosity. There were none. He stood up slowly, placed a folded $100 bill beneath the untouched bread plate, adjusted the sleeves of his navy wool coat, and turned to leave. He had no reason to say anything, and yet, as he reached the door, he paused. In the tall mirror near the entrance, he saw her take the seat across from his, the seat that had once belonged to Lillian. She pulled the plate in, tore a small bite, fed the baby first. Edward exhaled, a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding since 2017. The valet held open the car door. Edward climbed in. "Home, sir?" the driver asked gently. Edward nodded but turned to look back. Through the fogged window, he saw her smile faintly as the baby gripped a piece of asparagus, laughing like it was the finest toy in the world. Edward looked down at his hand still trembling and whispered, more to himself than anyone else, "She didn't take a thing. She just reminded me it was still worth offering." 6 years of silence had just been interrupted by one request, and it sounded, strangely, like the beginning of something he wasn't ready to lose. If this story moved you, don't keep it to yourself. Leave a comment below and tell us who are you watching this with right now. A friend, a loved one, or maybe someone who needed to hear this too. We'd love to know. The rain had turned into a quiet mist, clinging to the windshield like breath. Inside the black sedan, the world was silent. Edward Carter sat motionless in the back seat, his gaze fixed on the fogged window beside him, yet his mind was still somewhere back at table 9. The engine hummed softly. His driver, Marcus, a retired Navy man who'd driven him for nearly 5 years, stole a glance in the mirror. "You all right, sir?" he asked, his voice respectful, like always. Edward didn't respond at first. His fingers tapped once on his thigh, a restless rhythm. Outside, the streetlights passed by in amber streaks, but instead of answering, Edward leaned forward slightly, peering into the rearview mirror not to look at Marcus, but to look at what they were leaving behind. Through the receding glass, Langford's Prime shrank into the distance. The tall windows still glowed warmly, and in the corner just barely he caught a glimpse of her, the young woman, Maya. She was still seated at the table, the one he had left behind, the one he had never allowed anyone else to sit in since Lillian died, and she was feeding the child. He hadn't seen her eat a bite herself. She tore the food gently, tested the temperature with her wrist, then placed small pieces into the baby's open mouth. The way she held him, like the world could burn down around her, and as long as he ate, she'd survive. "Sir?" Marcus asked again. Edward's voice came out quiet. "Drive around the block." Slowly. The older man nodded without question and turned down a side street. Edward kept watching the mirror. The baby had started laughing now, a gurgling sound that somehow reached into Edward's ribs and twisted. She hadn't asked for a dime. She hadn't even looked directly at him until after the plate was in her hands. And still, something about her lingered, like the echo of a familiar song. Edward leaned back in the seat, resting his head against the cold leather. He didn't know her name. He didn't know her story. And yet, her presence had pierced the fog of ritual and grief like a chisel to stone. For 6 years, he'd performed this grim tradition. Same date, same time, same table. The anniversary of the accident had become his anchor and his punishment. But tonight something cracked. He thought of Lillian, of the way she used to laugh with their son, Caleb, whenever the waiter brought an extra bread basket. He thought of the sound of their voices filling their home, of the way he used to take everything for granted. He hadn't expected a stranger to remind him what warmth felt like. "Pull over," he said suddenly. Marcus slowed the car along a side street, parking beneath a row of ash trees shedding yellow leaves onto the sidewalk. Edward sat forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "Wait here." He stepped out of the car, pulling his coat tighter against the wind, and walked back toward the restaurant. The sky had deepened to navy blue, and the scent of rain lingered on the concrete. As he approached Langford's Prime, he slowed, careful not to make a scene. She wasn't at the table anymore. Panic flickered in his chest. He scanned the sidewalk, the valet stand, the bus stop across the street. Then he saw her. Maya was at the corner, sitting on a bench beneath the awning of a closed flower shop. Her baby nestled against her chest, already asleep. She was holding a small paper container. The restaurant must have boxed the remaining food for Herond. Her eyes were half closed from exhaustion. Edward crossed the street, hands in his pockets, uncertain what he was even going to say. He stopped a few feet away, not wanting to startle her. "Do you have a place to stay tonight?" he asked. Her eyes opened slowly. She didn't seem surprised to see him, just tired. "Shelter on Franklin. They close intake at 10, but they might still let me in." And he checked his watch. 9:53. "I can get you there in 5 minutes," he said. Maya studied him for a long second, then nodded once. He walked her back to the car. Marcus opened the door without a word, only raising his brows slightly at the sight of the young woman and child. Edward simply nodded, and they slid into the back seat. The baby stirred and whimpered. Maya rubbed his back, murmuring something Edward couldn't hear. "What's his name?" he asked softly. "Eli," she said, voice rough around the edges. "He's 7 months. Likes sweet potatoes, hates being cold." Edward smiled faintly, surprising even himself. "And yours?" she asked. "Edward," he replied. "Carter, you don't look like a man who gives away dinner." "I'm not," he said, staring out the window. "At least, I didn't used to be." They reached the shelter in just under 5 minutes. The building was small, tucked between a laundromat and a pawn shop, but the light above the door was still on. Maya turned to him before stepping out. "Thank you for the food and the ride." He wanted to say something to keep her from disappearing into the cold again. Instead, he handed her a business card. No explanation, just a gesture. "If you ever need help," he said. "Real help. Call." She took the card but didn't promise anything. Then she was gone, stepping into the shelter with Eli tucked close against her. Edward watched the door close behind her. Marcus waited a few seconds, then asked, "Home, sir?" Edward didn't answer right away. Instead, he whispered, "We'll come back tomorrow, just in case." In the silence that followed, for the first time in years, the weight in his chest felt just a little lighter, as if someone had cleared a place for something new to sit down beside his grief. And for once, he didn't feel the need to eat alone. The next morning, Edward Carter arrived at Langford's Prime at precisely 8 a.m., a time he never associated with this place. The restaurant was closed to the public, but for men like Edward, the rules bent with a phone call, a quiet favor, a key in an envelope. no questions asked. He stood by the same table, table 9, now stripped of linens and candles, its surface bare and slightly scuffed beneath the morning light. The room felt different in daylight, less haunted, less ceremonial. Just wood, windows, and silence. He wasn't there for a meal. He was there for memory. Last night had stayed with him like a whisper caught in his collar. He had returned home to a house that still bore the scent of Lillian's lavender candles, though he hadn't lit one in years. He had stood in Caleb's old room untouched, perfectly preserved, and for the first time, he hadn't just seen absence. He'd seen Maya's hands, breaking food into pieces, her voices soft but steady. The child, Eli, 7 months old, innocent, hungry, alive. And now Edward felt something he hadn't let himself feel in years, the ache of wanting to do more. At 9:30 a.m., he arrived at Franklin Shelter. It was raining again, a soft, persistent drizzle that made the sidewalks shine like glass. He approached the front desk slowly, not wanting to startle anyone. The woman behind the counter wore a pink hoodie and reading glasses on a chain. "May I help you? I'm looking for someone. Maya William. She came in last night with her baby. I gave her a ride." The woman squinted at him over the rim of her glasses. "Are you family?" "No," he said quietly, then added, "I might be a job offer." She raised an eyebrow, but said nothing. After a pause, she stood up and left through a side door. A few minutes later, Maya emerged, the baby cradled on her hip, cheeks flushed from sleep and heat. She didn't look surprised to see him. "I wasn't sure if you'd come back," she said. "I told my driver we would," he replied. She shifted Eli to her other hip. He liked the mashed potatoes. "I saw," Edward said, a small smile touching the corner of his mouth. They stood there awkwardly for a moment as people passed them in the hall, volunteers carrying laundry, other mothers holding children's hands, the hum of survival just beneath the surface. "I meant what I said," Edward said. "About help. Real help." Maya sighed, but it wasn't a dismissive sigh. It was weary, practiced. "Look, I'm not here to be someone's project. I don't need a savior. I'm not offering salvation," he said. "I'm offering opportunity." Her eyes narrowed. "That usually comes with fine print." He reached into his coat and pulled out a black leather folio. Inside was a manila envelope. "I run a design firm. Well, technically it's a tech company, but we're renovating our office in River North. We need a new layout, new color scheme, rebranding. My team can't design their way out of a cereal box. I saw the sketch you left on your napkin at Langford's." She blinked. "You saw that? You drew a full lobby layout in under 3 minutes, he said, in proportion, with flow, sightlines." She looked away. Old habits. They're still useful. She didn't take the envelope. She didn't run, either. She just looked tired of games. "I'm not looking for pity," she said. "You won't find any here," Edward said. "Only deadlines." That made her laugh. A real, unguarded laugh that softened the space between them. "What would I be signing up for?" "A 3-week freelance contract, paid up front. You don't need to come into the office. You can email designs. If you need supplies, I'll have them delivered. There's no catch." She considered him for a long moment. Then, very slowly, she reached for the envelope. Eli let out a small sneeze and giggled. Edward glanced at the baby. "He seems on board," Maya snorted. "He thinks you're a food source. I have been called worse." She smiled again, softer this time. Then her voice dropped. "Why me?" He paused, searched for the right words, then offered the only honest ones he had. "Because you reminded me what it means to feel something again, and because talent like yours shouldn't be buried under raincoats and shelters." Her lips parted slightly, caught off guard. "Just try it," he said. "1 room, 1 draft. If it doesn't work, we both walk away." Maya looked down at Eli, then back at Edward. She nodded once. "I'll need a pencil set. And tracing paper. Done. And real coffee. None of that instant garbage." "Ah," he grinned. "Now you're negotiating." They agreed to meet again in 3 days. She'd send the first drafts. If she needed to meet in person, he'd arrange a neutral spot. No offices. No pressure. Back in the car, Edward didn't feel victorious. He felt cautious. Hope had a way of hurting worse than grief when it was misplaced. But as the rain tapped gently on the roof, he glanced down at his lap and saw at the napkin she'd left folded in the folio. A single-line sketch of a reception area with sunlight coming through wide windows. It wasn't the detail that moved him. It was the inscription in the corner, drawn in small, slanted handwriting. "Even broken places deserve a light." He closed his eyes. For the first time in a long time, he wasn't haunted by what he'd lost. He was looking forward to what might come next. The office smelled of fresh paint and lemon-scented floor policia sterile, expensive kind of newness that clung to the air like ego. Edward Carter stood at the entrance of the unfinished River North building, the future headquarters of Carter Innovations, while a team of contractors moved around him like bees in a hive. Steel beams, exposed brick, too much white, too much glass. It all felt clean, modern, and cold. He looked down at the tablet in his hand. Maya's email had arrived an hour earlier. Attached, 4 rough concept sketches, all hand-drawn, all hauntingly elegant. She hadn't just designed an office, she'd designed a conversation. Her ideas transformed the space into something softer, more human. A reception area curved inward like a protective hand. Natural light filtered through panels angled to catch morning sun. A children's reading corner in the waiting area, not just practical, but symbolic. Edward had barely finished reading when his phone buzzed. His assistant Dana, her voice sharp as usual. "Edward, your 3 o'clock is early and asking a lot of questions. Send them up," he replied. Minutes later, 3 of Carter Innovations board members entered the open office shell. Franklin Ray suit, gray mind, always the skeptic. Yolanda sharp eyes, sharper tongue, and Nolanthe youngest but the loudest. "Ed," Franklin began, offering a firm handshake. "Didn't expect you here this early in the build. I like to keep my hands on the pulse," Edward replied evenly. Yolanda nodded toward the open concept plan spread across the table. "Is this our latest draft? The curves, the light angles? This isn't standard. It's emotional." Edward didn't flinch. "That's the point." "Who's the designer?" Nolan asked. Edward paused for half a breath. "Freelance consultant, contract-based." Franklin narrowed his eyes. "Name?" "Maya William." "Ah." There was a short silence. Franklin tapped his fingers on the table. "Is that the woman from the photo circulating online? The one from the restaurant?" Edward's jaw clenched. He kept his tone level. "She's the designer." Nolan scoffed. "And we're trusting the rebranding of $100 million space to a homeless 20-year-old with a baby and a sketch pad?" "She's not homeless anymore," Edward said. "That's your answer?" "No," he said. "This is, He turned the tablet toward them, showing Maya's rendering in full resolution. Then he projected it onto the large digital screen hanging above the dry wall. Yolanda leaned forward. "That's good." Franklin studied the lines. "Impressive for hand-drawn. Conceptually bold. But still, who vetted her?" "I did," Edward said. "And you expect us to believe this isn't personal?" Nolan said. Edward met his gaze. "It is personal, because I believe in rebuilding things that others discard." "Oh." Silence again. Tense, sharp-edged. Yolanda finally spoke. "Let's see where the next revision goes. If she can follow through, I won't care if she drew it in the back of a soup kitchen." Franklin nodded grudgingly. Nolan said nothing. After they left, Dana approached from the far end of the space. "You're attracting heat," she warned. "Board members talk. Shareholders listen. They're all asking the same question. Why her?" Edward stared out the large windows. "Because no one else saw the light in this building the way she did." Later that afternoon, he called Maya. She answered after the 3rd ring. He could hear Eli babbling in the background. "Did they hate it?" she asked without preamble. "No," Edward replied. "They're intrigued. Some of them are cautious. So they hated it," she said flatly. He chuckled. "They're rich. That's how they say good job." He heard her exhale, a slow release of tension. "I need you to come in next week," he said. "There's a conference room I want you to reimagine. I can have Dana meet you, and—" "No," Maya cut in. "If I walk in with a baby on my hip, they'll look at me like I'm the intern who lost her badge." "You're not an intern." "I know that," she said. "But people like them don't." He paused. "Then let's meet off-site. You set the location. Neutral ground." Maya thought for a second. "There's a diner on West Kinsey. Corner booth. Thursday at 10. I'll be there." The line clicked. Edward sat back in his chair and stared at the ceiling. He hadn't planned to protect her. He hadn't expected to want to. But now that he'd opened the door, he wasn't going to let them slam it shut behind her. The following day, someone from marketing forwarded him an internal message, an anonymous complaint, sent to the HR inbox. Subject: nepotism and reputation risk. Claim: CEO is offering corporate opportunities to a personal acquaintance with no formal vetting. Negative media attention likely. Strongly suggest review. It wasn't signed, but Edward already had a good idea who wrote it. He deleted the message. Then he opened a new email. Subject: Conference Room C. Design. Next phase. To Maya William. Message: You're not here to impress them. You're here to prove that places and people can be more than what the world expects. Let's build something they can't ignore. He hovered for a moment, then hit send. And as the message disappeared into the network, Edward Carter realized something else. He wasn't trying to save her. He was trying not to lose what she made him remember. That even a man surrounded by glass and concrete could still feel warmth when someone chose to sit across from him and simply stay. The diner on West Kinsey hadn't changed in 30 years. The vinyl booth squeaked when you shifted. The coffee came hot and slightly burnt, and the ceiling fans spun like they were powered by memory. Edward Carter arrived 5 minutes early, dressed in a tailored navy coat that looked out of place among the truckers and retired factory workers sipping coffee at the counter. He took the corner booth, just like Maya had asked, and ordered a black coffee he had no intention of drinking. At exactly 10, she walked in jeans, a clean but faded hoodie, baby Eli in a carrier strapped to her front. Her hair was tied up higher today, tighter, like she meant business. She slid into the booth across from him, adjusting Eli carefully so he nestled between them. "Still think you're not trying to save me?" she said without smiling. Edward met her eyes. "Still think you don't need anyone?" She gave him a look, then grabbed a menu and studied it like it held national secrets. He let the silence hang. He wasn't in a rush. He'd learned over the years that some of the most important conversations began in the pauses. Finally, she set the menu down. "You didn't have to defend me in that meeting." "I didn't do it for you," Edward replied. "I did it for the design. But I'll admit protecting both felt right. I don't want you putting your reputation on the line for someone like me." And what kind of person is that exactly?" "Someone who was sleeping in a shelter last week," she said, tone hardening. "Someone who has to choose between formula and rent. Someone who had a scholarship to Parsons and lost it before her second year because life doesn't wait for your GPA. Edward leaned forward. "You think that disqualifies you?" "I think it makes me a gamble," she said, voice low. "And men like you don't bet on people like me unless they're expecting something in return." There it was. Not anger, not accusation, just the deeply rooted bruise of experience. She wasn't testing him, she was warning him. He didn't flinch. "I'm not asking for anything." Maya looked at him like she wanted to believe that. Then why keep showing up? Edward didn't answer right away. He looked at Eli instead, who was awake now, eyes wide and curious. "Because I saw my son in his face," he said quietly, "and it scared the hell out of me." Maya's expression changed. Her mouth softened, but her eyes stayed alert. "You had a son?" "Caleb. He would have been 9 this year." Edward looked down at his hands. "He and my wife, they died in a car crash 6 years ago. I was supposed to be driving that night." "I'm sorry," she whispered. He nodded. "I stopped living that night too. Just took longer to bury the rest." Maya didn't speak, but something in her gaze shifted. Respect, not pity. She took a deep breath. "I wasn't looking for charity," she said. "I know. I'm still not." "Good," he said. "Because this isn't charity, it's investment." She chuckled low and unexpected. "You do know how to package your guilt in business terms." "Old habit." The waitress came and went, dropping off pancakes for Maya and a small plate of scrambled eggs for Eli, though Edward had requested it. Eli squealed at the food, tiny hands grabbing at the edge of the plate. Maya helped him eat, cutting up the eggs into tiny pieces, her fingers deft and practiced. "I used to draw floor plans in the margins of my notebooks in high school," she said suddenly. "I'd redesign the cafeteria to make it quieter, or the library to have more corners. My teacher thought I was just bored." "You were planning a better world," Edward said. "Maybe," she shrugged. Or maybe I just wanted a space that didn't feel like it was squeezing the life out of me. You've done that for my company. For me, he said. Your next project is the third-floor community room and breakout spaces. We want it to feel less like a workplace and more like a place where things grow. Maya blinked. You want me to design growth? I want you to imagine what it feels like to belong somewhere, and draw from that. She went still. A long beat passed. Okay, she said softly, but I want full creative draft freedom. No committee notes until the second round. He smiled. You drive a hard bargain. I have to. I've never had the luxury of failing. You won't. They finished the meal slowly. Eli babbled and giggled, smearing egg on the table and Maya's sleeve. She laughed, this time without reservation, and wiped his face with a napkin. Edward watched them both, the noise of the diner falling away. For a moment, he imagined a life that didn't have to be defined by absence. When they got up to leave, Maya turned to him at the door. I'll send you the first round of designs next week, she said. But don't expect miracles. He held the door open for her. I don't need miracles, just honesty. As she stepped out into the street, the wind tousled her hair. Eli let out a loud, happy squawk, reaching up toward the sky. Edward stood there for a second longer, then looked down at the small paper napkin she'd left behind on the booth seat. On it, in her same neat handwriting, was a simple sketch, a spiral staircase lit from above by a round skylight, and beneath it, a line. Sometimes the only way up is through. Edward folded the napkin carefully and tucked it into his coat pocket. He didn't know where this road was going, but he knew this much. It wasn't just about fixing a space anymore. It was about rebuilding something neither of them dared to name yet. It wasn't the sketches that caused the backlash, it was the silence that followed them. Maya's designs for the third floor arrived on Monday morning in Edward's inbox. A blend of warmth and functionality, inviting tones, subtle curves, and multi-purpose spaces that echoed not corporate coldness, but quiet resilience. She had written a brief description in her email. A workplace should feel like a place you want to stay, not one you need to escape. Edward forwarded the files to the internal design review committee without comment, as he always did. But this time, the silence that came back wasn't the quiet of admiration. It was loaded, strategic, and familiar. By Wednesday, the undercurrents turned vocal. Yolanda called a surprise roundtable with the other executives. It wasn't scheduled, it wasn't recorded, but the intent was clear. We need to talk, she said, standing at the head of the polished walnut table. Edward leaned back, folding his arms, ready. Franklin cut straight to the point. We've received concerns, not about the design itself, but about influence. What kind of concerns? Edward asked, already knowing. Yolanda didn't look at him directly. There's a sense that this arrangement with Miss William lacks transparency. You're pushing through changes without collaborative input. You've sidelined our internal team. Edward held back a bitter laugh. Your internal team hasn't produced anything in 6 weeks. Maya delivered 3 full layouts in 2. She also doesn't come into the office, Franklin said. She's never met the board. There's no vetting process. This feels personal. It is, Edward said flatly, but not in the way you're implying. There was a beat of silence. Nolan finally spoke, arms crossed. This isn't about charity, Edward. We're not in the business of social redemption. Edward's voice sharpened. We're in the business of innovation, and she is 10 times more innovative than anyone in that department. That may be, Yolanda said carefully, but appearances matter. The media is already starting to whisper about your connection to her, about dinner girls and freelance muses. It's going to bleed into investor confidence. There it was. Not about competence, about perception. Edward stood, slowly, deliberately. You're worried about perception. Let me make something clear. If our investors are scared of a woman with a baby and a talent for rebuilding broken spaces, then maybe we're building the wrong kind of company. Yolanda's jaw clenched, but she didn't respond. He didn't give them the chance to regroup. He walked out. Back in his office, Edward stared at the city skyline, fury smoldering beneath his skin. It wasn't just the hypocrisy, it was the ease with which they flattened Maya into a stereotype. They didn't see the long nights, the quiet strength, the fact that she never asked for more than what was necessary. He picked up the phone and dialed. She answered on the second ring. Hey, she said, sounding out of breath. Where are you? Local library. Eli knocked out on my lap. Why? He paused, unsure how much to tell her. There was a meeting. A good one or a bad one? A gutless one, he said. Some of the board thinks your involvement is risky. There was a beat of silence. Let me guess. The girl from the restaurant isn't boardroom material. It's more than that, he said carefully. They're implying things, twisting what this is. I told you this would happen, she said. No anger in her voice, just exhaustion. I know. I can pull back, she offered. Let you handle it. I don't want to become a liability. You're not a liability. Edward, she said, gentle but firm. You're risking a lot, maybe too much. He pressed a hand to his temple. This isn't just about work anymore. She exhaled. I know. Another pause. I need some air, she said. Clear my head. Where? The bridge near the sculpture garden, where the city looks less like a cage. I'll meet you. But by the time Edward arrived 20 minutes later, she wasn't there. He waited. 10 minutes. 15. Nothing. He called. No answer. Texted. No reply. The next morning, he woke to find her number disconnected. Gone. No forwarding address. No email. Just silence. At the office, the contractors continued building off her design drafts, unaware that the architect behind them had vanished. Edward tried not to show the panic in his chest. He told Dana to check local shelters, had Marcus drive by the library, even stopped by the shelter on Franklin. But Maya was gone. The only thing she left behind was the napkin sketch he still kept in his coat. That afternoon, a courier arrived with a plain brown envelope. No return address. Inside, the final layout for the 3rd floor. Complete, labeled, signed with her initials. Taped to the back was a sticky note, written in that familiar, neat handwriting. This was never about building something for you. It was about proving I could still build it all. Thank you for the table. M. Edward sat down, stared at the design. It was beautiful, practical, hopeful, and suddenly, achingly, unbearable. He leaned forward, elbows on the desk, head in his hands. For years, he'd been trapped in grief, unable to move. Now that he finally had something worth moving toward, it was gone before he could ask it to stay. And for the first time since the accident, Edward Carter didn't know if he would recover from this kind of silence. Edward Carter walked through his penthouse apartment as if it no longer belonged to him. The walls echoed too loudly, as if they were mocking him with the silence he once sought. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a sweeping view of the city, but he didn't look out. The skyline had never felt so far away. He passed the living room, where a lone photo of Lillian and Caleb still sat on the mantel. He didn't stop to look. Not today. He moved into the kitchen, opened the fridge, and stared at its contents like a man trying to remember why he'd come. Everything inside was perfectly arranged, pre-cut fruit, bottled water, expensive cheeses, nothing that felt like nourishment. He closed it, walked into the hallway, stopped in front of the one door he hadn't opened in over a year. Caleb's room. It was still exactly as it had been on the day of the crash. Toy cars neatly lined on the shelf, a small rocket ship lamp on the nightstand, the bed made, the blanket tucked in by hands that once believed in a tomorrow. He opened the door slowly. The scent hit him first dust and memory. He stepped inside and sat on the edge of the bed, one hand gripping the bedpost. 6 years. 6 years of silence, of rituals, of grief turned routine. And now Maya was gone, and it felt like the room was mourning again, like it had lost someone else. He ran a hand through his hair and sat back, letting the weight of the room close in on him. He had found someone who didn't look at him with pity, who didn't ask for anything but a chance. Someone who drew beauty from ruin, who carried a child and still found space to imagine light. And he'd let her slip through his fingers. It wasn't that she had left. It was that he hadn't done enough to make her want to stay. He remembered the last words she said on the phone. Maybe you're risking too much. Number. He hadn't risked enough. He stood up suddenly, left the room, and grabbed his coat. 30 minutes later, he was back on Franklin Avenue. The shelter manager recognized him immediately. She's not here, the woman said gently. She checked out 2 nights ago. Didn't leave a forwarding address. Did she say anything? The woman hesitated, then pulled a folded note from the drawer. She left this for you. I wasn't sure I'd see you again. Edward opened it. Edward, I needed to disappear before I started believing I could stay. You gave me more than a plate. You gave me the space to remember who I was before I had to be everything for someone else. Don't look for me. I won't be where you expect. M. He folded the note carefully, his hands tighter than he intended. Where she wouldn't be expected. He turned that line over in his mind the entire drive back. He passed buildings, bus stops, park benches, every place she might have gone if she had nowhere else. But Maya wasn't the kind to vanish into shadows. She was the kind to walk into the light, even if it burned. The city felt too big that night, too full of could-have-beens. When he got home, he poured a drink and sat by the window. But instead of looking out, he opened his laptop and typed her name into every public database he could think of. Nothing. Not in any design registries, not in any public shelters, not in any community grant rosters. But then something odd came up, an event listing from a community center on the west side. Mothers Reclaiming Space. Volunteer Art Night. Her name wasn't on the flyer, but the design in the background, the soft curves, the warmth, the hand-drawn sunlight spilling through windowsill was hers. He recognized the touch. He printed the flyer and sat with it for a long while. A week passed. He didn't go right away. He wasn't sure he should. But on the 8th night, he drove to the address, parked across the street, and waited. It was almost 10 when the doors opened and volunteers began to leave. Parents with tired eyes, kids with finger-painted shirts, and then she stepped out. Maya, hair tied back, jacket too thin, baby in a carrier, asleep. She looked exactly the same and completely different. She stopped on the sidewalk, looked around as if she felt something, and then her eyes found him. He stepped out of the car. For a moment, they just stood there. Neither moved. Then Maya walked forward, slowly, carefully, like she wasn't sure if the ground between them was stable. You found me, she said quietly. I was always going to, Edward said. Why? Because this time, I'm not leaving first. She stared at him. You can't fix me. I don't want to. Then what do you want? He swallowed hard. I want to build something. Not from scratch. Not perfect, but real. Something that doesn't vanish when it gets hard. Her breath caught. She looked down at Eli, then back at him. And what if I vanish again? She asked. I'll wait, he said, even if it takes 6 more years. A long silence. Then, slowly, Maya stepped closer. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. She just took his hand. And for Edward Carter, a man who had lived in the echo of loss for too long, that was more than enough. The church basement smelled of tomato soup, wet coats, and old linoleum. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a soft, forgiving glow across the worn tables and mismatched chairs. It wasn't glamorous, but it was warm, safe, a haven in a world that too often mistook resilience for rebellion. Maya stood behind the counter, ladle in hand, her apron dusted with flour and her sleeves rolled to her elbows. She moved with purpose, but not urgency, like someone who had learned to balance exhaustion with grace. Beside her, a teen volunteer struggled with a stubborn crockpot lid, while an older woman offered slices of bread to the line forming at the door. Eli was asleep in the baby sling across her chest, breathing slow and steady. He had grown heavier these past few weeks, fuller, stronger. He laughed more now, reached for things, trusted without question. Maya didn't look up when she heard the door open. She didn't have to. She felt it. The air shifted the way it always did when he walked in, as though the room, like her, recognized his presence before her eyes did. Edward didn't speak right away. He stood at the end of the serving table, hands in his coat pockets, watching her work. She dipped the ladle, poured, handed a bowl across the counter. Another. Only when the line thinned did she finally glance over. I thought I told you not to find me, she said, half smiling. I ignored you, he said, stepping forward. Just like you ignored me when you left. She handed off the ladle to another volunteer and wiped her hands on a cloth. Her shoulders had less tension than before, but her guard was still there just beneath the surface. Why are you here? She asked. He looked around. Because you are. That's not an answer. Edward took a slow breath. Then here's the truth. I haven't stopped thinking about you. About what you gave me. Not just the designs. Not just your time. but the reminder that life isn't something you preserve in a penthouse with silence. It's something you rebuild. One floor, one breath, one moment at a time. Maya crossed her arms. You sound like one of those non-profit brochures. He chuckled. Give me credit. I've learned from the best. She tilted her head, studying him. You're not here to hire me again. No, he said. This isn't about work. She hesitated. Then what? He stepped closer, gently now, aware of every inch between them. I'm here because I want to make a different offer, he said softly. Not a project, not a contract, a life, together. If you want it. Maya looked down, suddenly unsure how to meet his gaze. For someone who had faced so many storms, this felt like the most terrifying invitation of all. I don't have a blueprint for that, she whispered. Neither do I, he said, but we can draw it as we go. The room around them faded volunteers chatting, soup simmering, children playing in the back, all of it quieted into a hum beneath the moment stretching between them. Maya closed her eyes. When she opened them, she was blinking back tears. You should know, she said, voice catching. I don't come with guarantees. I break down sometimes. I worry more than I should. I still flinch when someone raises their voice. I don't always know how to ask for help. Edward stepped even closer, his voice barely above a breath. Then let me learn your language. She looked at him. Finally, truly looked. The sharp lines of grief in his face had softened. His eyes still carried pain, but they also held something she hadn't dared to believe in. Hope. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out something small and folded. A napkin, worn at the corners. She took it carefully, unfolding it. Her own sketch years ago, now a spiral staircase with light streaming from above. You kept it? It kept me, he said. A pause. Then Maya nodded. Okay, she whispered. Okay? She gave him a half laugh, half sob. Okay to the life, to the rebuild, to the unknown. Eli stirred in her sling, letting out a soft whimper. Maya adjusted the blanket, soothing him with a gentle sway. Edward smiled, his voice low. He still thinks I'm a food source. You are, she teased, just in a different way. They stood in that warmth for another beat before the old church bell upstairs rang twice time for cleanup. Come back next week, she said as she turned toward the sink. I plan to, he said. Same time? Every time. As she moved, Edward joined her, grabbing a towel, drying bowls. There was no fanfare, no kiss, no promises wrapped in gold. Just two people, side by side, quietly beginning again. Not as a rescue, but as a return. A home not built with stone and glass, but with small daily choices. He didn't know what chapter would come next, but he knew this was no longer a story about what he'd lost. It was about what he'd chosen to find. 3 months later, the new Carter Innovations headquarters opened under the morning sun, its glass panels reflecting the soft winter light like polished mirrors of possibility. The press was already gathered outside, bundled in coats, cameras poised, waiting for the ribbon cutting. But inside the building, the air was still quiet, reverent, as if the space itself was holding its breath. Edward Carter stood in the center of the third-floor atrium, his hands clasped behind his back, surrounded by what had once only existed in a sketch-a-dream brought to life by Maya's hands. The walls weren't cold or industrial. They curved gently, like arms drawing people in. Light filtered through skylights placed exactly where Maya had insisted they should go. It bathed the room in gold. Beneath it, community tables stood ready, surrounded by reading nooks and green corners filled with low-maintenance plants. There was even a small play area tucked quietly along the south wall, filled with blocks and books, and a rocking chair that had already earned its first smudges from eager little fingers. Edward turned as footsteps approached. Maya entered with Eli balanced on one hip, the little boy now walking on his own but too sleepy to do so yet this morning. She wore a simple navy dress, a thin silver bracelet on her wrist, her hair pulled back loosely. She didn't look like a designer today. She looked like someone who belonged here not because she built the space, but because she understood it. He's going to fall asleep in the middle of your speech, she said, smiling. I'll take that as a vote of confidence, Edward replied. She walked slowly, taking in the room as if seeing it for the first time, not in drafts or printouts or scattered sketches across a diner table, but in real texture and light. It's almost exactly like I imagined, she whispered. Almost? I didn't think it would feel this quiet, like it's waiting for someone. It was, Edward said. It was waiting for you. She met his eyes and said nothing, but something in her expression softened. People began to trickle in, employees, guests, city leaders, investors. There were polite hellos, camera flashes, small talk floating through the air. But Edward watched only Maya as she took a seat in the back with Eli, bouncing him lightly on her knee. When it was time, Dana handed him a microphone, and Edward stepped onto the small raised platform near the far windows. He paused before speaking, taking a moment to scan the room. Not for attention, for gratitude. I won't take up much of your morning, he began, his voice calm, clear. You've all read the press kits. You've seen the renderings. Some of you were part of the design process. But what I want to talk about today isn't this building. It's what we build when no one is looking. The crowd fell quiet. 6 years ago, I lost everything that made me believe in forward motion. I went through the motions meetings, earnings calls, dinners with no conversation, but I was never really here. Then one night, someone asked me for my food. That's how it started. A question. A moment. He looked over at Maya. She sat perfectly still, her lips parted slightly. She didn't ask for a handout. She asked for a chance. And in doing so, she gave me one. Not to rebuild a business, but to remember how to feel. He paused. His voice dropped just enough to let the weight of it land. I tell you this because there's a tendency in business and in life to value what's polished, what's proven. But sometimes the thing that changes everything is a scribbled sketch on a napkin, or a single act of trust, or a child's laugh at a soup table. He looked down, then back up again, voice firm now. This building is not a monument to wealth. It's a working space, designed by someone who knew what it meant to be overlooked, and who refused to stay invisible. Her name is Maya William, and if you haven't heard of her yet, you will. A smattering of applause turned into something fuller, something genuine. Maya blinked hard, clutching Eli a little closer, the boy now fast asleep against her chest. After the ceremony, while the crowd mingled, Edward walked over to her. She was standing now, fingers curled around the back of a chair, trying to appear casual, but he saw through her. You should have been up there with me, he said. I was, she replied softly. I just didn't need the mic. They stood in the center of the space she had imagined, surrounded by strangers, and yet completely alone. He reached into his coat pocket again, like a quiet ritual, and pulled out the napkin sketch. You keep that on you? Every day. I've made 100 better ones since. None that changed me. She smiled, then reached into her purse and pulled out a tiny lunchbox. From it, she took a small sandwich wrapped in parchment paper and handed it to him. You didn't eat at your own ribbon cutting, she said. He took it, smiling. What is it? Turkey and Swiss, with a little rosemary. He opened the parchment slowly. You remembered. I always remember. He took a bite. Warm, simple, familiar. And in that moment, Edward Carter knew this wasn't just the closing of a chapter. It was the beginning of the real story. Not of redemption or charity, but of partnership, of quiet, unspoken strength. He looked at Maya and whispered, This is the last bite I'll ever need. She leaned in, resting her head lightly against his shoulder. And in a building born from loss, bathed in light, surrounded by people who never knew the whole story, two souls chose to rebuild not with walls and glass, but with moments. Small, honest, enough